Raymond Miller and Donald Haskins were once just two ordinary names in a quiet California town, until the day their dark secret was unearthed. For decades, they had been hiding in plain sight, burying their victims in forgotten woods, leaving only bones and coins behind. They weren't just killers, they were masterminds of one of the longest and most horrifying murder sprees in American history. This is the chilling story of how two men turned a peaceful town into a graveyard, and how their terrifying reign finally came to an end. In the summer of 1998, the town of Rosewood, California, was a picture of calm. Nestled between rolling hills and orange groves, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and people rarely locked their doors at night. Life moved slowly there, with children riding their bikes down quiet streets and neighbors chatting on front porches. Until the sun set, nothing bad ever seemed to happen in Rosewood. That belief shattered the day Jessica Palmer disappeared. She was just 17, a bright, cheerful girl known for her kind nature and big dreams. She had been working the evening shift at Rosie's Diner, a small place near the highway where most of the locals gathered. After her shift ended around 9 o'clock, she was last seen leaving the diner to walk home, something she had done countless times before. But that night, she never made it back. When Jessica didn't return home, her parents became alarmed. They called the police, who initially treated it as a runaway case, assuming she had left on her own. But her family and friends insisted that wasn't like her. She had no reason to run away. As hours turned into days, volunteers and search parties began combing the town and surrounding woods, desperately looking for any sign of her. Flyers were posted on telephone poles and store windows, and news of a disappearance spread quickly throughout Rosewood. Everyone was on edge. 3 weeks later, the horror unfolded in the most unexpected way. A hunter was trekking through the dense woods just outside of town when he stumbled upon a spot of disturbed earth. Out of curiosity, he began to dig with his hands, and soon uncovered something that made his blood run cold. A human hand, partially wrapped in a torn piece of cloth. He immediately called the authorities. Within hours, police had cordoned off the area and begun carefully excavating the site. The body was identified as Jessica Palmer. She had been buried in a shallow grave, hastily covered with dirt and branches. Her death was brutal, and the entire town was stunned by the discovery. However, what was found next changed everything. As forensic teams continued to dig, they uncovered another set of bones beneath Jessica's remains. Shocked, investigators kept digging and discovered even more skeletal remains, some so old they had nearly turned to dust. The police realized they had stumbled upon something far worse than a single murder. This wasn't just Jessica's burial site, it was a mass grave. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the small town, broadcasting images of police tents, flashing lights, and crime scene tape. Rosewood, once known for its peace and charm, became the focus of national attention. The wooded area was quickly dubbed the Boneyard by the media, and rumors of a serial killer began to swirl. Panic gripped the town. People stopped letting their children play outside. Doors were locked, and every stranger was met with suspicion. No one could believe something so horrifying had been hiding right in their own backyard for so many years, and everyone was left wondering just how deep the nightmare would go. As investigators continued their work at the site, it became clear that the town of Rosewood was facing something far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. Day after day, forensic teams dug deeper into the dense earth of the Boneyard, unearthing more human remains. With each body uncovered, the sense of dread grew stronger. By the end of the first week, the count had reached 9. Men and women, young and old, their bones scattered across different parts of the clearing, each buried in the same haphazard fashion. The oldest remains dated back more than 20 years, while others were far more recent. The connection between the victims was not immediately clear. At first, it seemed random, different ages, backgrounds, and walks of life, but there was one haunting similarity. Each victim had a small coin placed in their mouth, carefully positioned before burial. This discovery sent chills through the investigators, suggesting that the killer or killers weren't just hiding bodies, they were following a ritual. The coins were old, some even antique, with dates ranging back to the early 1900s. Experts believed the practice could be symbolic, possibly linked to ancient burial traditions. It was unlike anything the local police had ever encountered. The case quickly escalated beyond the town's resources. The sheriff, realizing the scope of what they had uncovered, reached out to the FBI for assistance. A specialized task force arrived in Rosewood within days, bringing forensic experts, profilers, and seasoned investigators. Together, they began assembling a timeline, carefully documenting each victim and cross-referencing missing persons reports from the region daughters. The investigation grew. A chilling pattern began to emerge. All of the victims had disappeared within a 50-mile radius of Rosewood. Many had been last seen near remote areas along highways, near old campsites, or close to forested regions on the outskirts of small towns. It was clear that whoever was responsible had a deep familiarity with the land. They knew exactly where to bury the bodies and how to keep them hidden for decades. The town's fear turned into full-blown panic. Rumors spread quickly, with some believing there was a cult operating in the area. Others suspected a long-active serial killer who had gone undetected for years. People began flooding the police station with tips, most of which led nowhere. Still, one thing was certain: the person or people responsible had been living among them all along, moving unnoticed through their lives, hiding in plain sight. Investigators grew increasingly convinced they were dealing with more than one killer. The logistics of the burials, the length of time the crimes had gone on, and the ritualistic placement of the coins all pointed toward a duo. The media seized on this theory, giving the unknown suspects a chilling name: the Boneyard Killers. As news of the case spread, the pressure mounted. Every law enforcement agency involved knew they had to find answers before more bodies surfaced. But deep down, they feared they were only beginning to uncover the full extent of the horror. The investigation soon took a turn toward the past as the FBI dug deeper into the connections surrounding the victims. Many of the earlier cases had gone cold decades ago, long before DNA technology became widespread. Investigators combed through old police files, missing persons reports, and newspaper clippings, searching for anything that could reveal a link between the victims or point toward a suspect. Slowly, a strange connection began to take shape. Several of the earliest victims had ties to the same company, a local construction business called Miller & Sons Excavation, which had operated throughout the 1970s and 1980s in the Rosewood area. Miller & Sons had specialized in remote construction projects, often working on secluded job sites like logging roads, drainage systems, and isolated cabins deep in the woods. The company had folded in the early 1990s after a series of financial problems, and many of its employees had long since left town. However, two names from the company's employment records kept appearing in connection with the victims. The first was Raymond Miller, the son of the company's founder and a foreman on many of its projects. The second was Donald Haskins, a known drifter with a history of theft and minor assault charges, who had worked alongside Miller on various jobs. What made these two men stand out wasn't just their association with the victims or their access to secluded sites, it was their sudden disappearance. Both men had seemingly vanished in the early 1990s, leaving no forwarding address and abandoning their belongings. It was as if they had simply walked away from their lives and never looked back. Investigators began interviewing former co-workers and acquaintances, hoping to learn more about the two men. What they found was deeply unsettling. Several people recalled that Raymond Miller had always been an odd character, quiet, with a fascination for strange subjects like ancient rituals and death folklore. He had once been overheard talking about how the woods could hide anything, a comment that took on a sinister meaning in light of recent events. Donald Haskins, on the other hand, had been known for his violent temper and unsettling sense of humor. Some remembered him joking about feeding the earth during late-night drinking sessions. The breakthrough came when authorities traced an old storage unit that had been rented under Raymond Miller's name. It had been untouched for years, its rent paid automatically through an old bank account. Inside the unit, investigators discovered a chilling collection of evidence. There were boxes filled with personal items belonging to missing persons, including wallets, jewelry, and drivers' licenses. Old tools were scattered around the space, many of them covered in rust but still identifiable as the kind used in excavation work. Maps of the Rosewood area were pinned to the walls, each marked with small red X locations that seemed to match the sites where bodies had been found. Among the most disturbing items were a stack of photographs, each one showing freshly dug graves in the grainy images to men stood near the burial sites, their faces partially obscured by hats and shadows, but their identities were clear enough. It was Raymond Miller and Donald Haskins. The evidence left no doubt they were the Boneyard Killers. With the discovery of the storage unit, investigators finally had names and faces for the Boneyard Killers. The entire country watched in shock as news outlets broadcast photos of Raymond Miller and Donald Haskins, now confirmed as the men behind decades of horrifying murders. The manhunt began immediately, with their faces plastered across newspapers, television screens, and billboards nationwide. The FBI believed they had either fled the country or were living under false identities, and the search expanded beyond California's borders. Tips began flooding in from every corner of the country, with people claiming to have seen the men. In bus stations, motels, and backwoods towns, investigators chased lead after lead, but most turned out to be cases of mistaken identity or desperate individuals seeking attention. Despite the nationwide alert Miller and Haskins seemed to have vanished without a trace, months passed with no significant breakthroughs. The trail had grown cold, and some within the FBI feared the men were long gone, possibly living in a different country under completely new lives. The case was on the verge of stalling when an unexpected call came in from a retired truck driver living in Texas. He told authorities he had picked up two drifters near the Arizona border nearly 10 years earlier. According to him, they had been hitchhiking with only backpacks and a box of tools. One of them, he recalled, had odd tattoos and kept talking about starting over somewhere new, somewhere far away from anyone who knew them. The truck driver remembered their faces clearly and was certain that one of them was Raymond Miller. He said they talked about heading toward Mexico, mentioning a remote village near the border where no one asked questions. Investigators quickly followed up on the tip and began combing through border records, looking for any indication that Miller and Haskins had crossed into Mexico. Their persistence paid off when they located a pair of men living in a small village on the outskirts of Baja California. They were running an auto repair shop, going by the names Rick Dalton and Henry West. The descriptions matched perfectly. Working alongside Mexican authorities, the FBI coordinated a carefully planned raid on their property. Officers surrounded the small, run-down home and garage in the early morning hours. the two men were arrested, without resistance, showing no signs of surprise or fear as they were taken into custody. It was as if they had been expecting it all along. The search of their property revealed a terrifying sight. Behind their modest home, hidden beneath an old shed, authorities uncovered 3 more shallow graves. The remains were later identified as missing persons from nearby towns, all fitting the same victim profile as the earlier cases. The arrests sent shockwaves across the world. After decades of haunting disappearances and unanswered questions, the Boneyard Killers had finally been captured. The sense of relief in Rosewood was overwhelming, but along with it came a chilling realization the killers had never stopped. They had simply moved their hunting ground, continuing their crimes in silence, hidden just across the border. The trial of Raymond Miller and Donald Haskins quickly became one of the most infamous cases in California's history. Courtrooms were packed with journalists, family members of the victims, and curious onlookers eager to witness the men behind the horrors that had haunted Rosewood for decades. Both men appeared calm and unemotional as they were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, their faces expressionless despite the cameras flashing around them. Neither showed the slightest hint of remorse as prosecutors revealed the shocking details of their crimes. During the trial, prosecutors painted a chilling picture of the pair's decades-long killing spree. They described how Miller and Haskins had deliberately targeted vulnerable people, those who would not be easily missed. Most of their victims were drifters, hitchhikers, runaways, or people living on the fringes of society. They had chosen victims from remote areas, offering them rides, work, or shelter, then luring them to isolated spots where no one could hear their screams. Once there, the victims were murdered and buried in shallow graves with coins placed carefully in their mouths. The symbolism of the coins horrified everyone watching the trial, especially when it was revealed that Miller believed he was paying their passage into the afterlife to gain power over them. Expert witnesses were called in to explain the ritualistic nature of the killings. Forensic psychologists described Miller as a man obsessed with control and death, someone who had developed a twisted belief system around ancient burial customs. Haskins, on the other hand, was portrayed as a follower eager to please Miller and addicted to the violence itself, according to testimony. Haskins enjoyed the act of killing and took pride in evading capture for so many years. Together, they had formed a deadly partnership, feeding off each other's dark urges. As the trial went on, more evidence emerged from the storage unit and the graves behind their home in Mexico. The maps with marked burial sites, the photographs of graves, and the personal belongings of the victims were all presented to the jury. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no question of their guilt. Both men were convicted on multiple counts of murder, with the judge calling their crimes some of the most monstrous acts ever committed in the state's history. The sentence was harsh but inevitable. Both men were given life sentences without the possibility of parole. There would be no appeals, no second chances. They would spend the rest of their lives behind bars, far from the woods where they had hidden their dark secrets for so long. Even after the verdict, the scars left on Rosewood remained. Though the killers were behind bars, the fear lingered. People continued to wonder how many victims had never been found. Authorities suspected there could still be more burial sites, scattered in remote corners of California and even beyond. Search teams kept looking, but some believed the full truth would never be known. The case of the Boneyard Killers remains a haunting reminder that true evil can hide in plain sight, disguised by quiet smiles and familiar faces, leaving behind a legacy of terror that would never truly fade.